You know that feeling, that kind of constant hum of stimulation,
Hmm.
the notifications, the endless scroll, the next bite, the next click. I mean, we live in a world that's just absolutely overflowing with rewarding stimuli.
It really is.
It's not just stuff, it's drugs, food, news, gambling, shopping, gaming, social media, just this deluge coming at us 24/7.
Totally. And the sources we're exploring in this deep dive, especially the key insights from Dopamine Nation by Dr. Anna Lembke, they really drive that home right from the start.
Yeah.
Yeah, the author uses an incredibly vivid image. She says the smartphone is the modern-day hypodermic needle, delivering digital dopamine 24/7 for a wired generation.
Wow. A hypodermic needle. That comparison immediately tells you the sort of intensity and potential impact we're talking about.
Right. It's stark.
And our mission today is really to unpack why understanding our relationship with pleasure and pain is so vital in this environment. We're going to dive into the fascinating neuroscience of how our brains process reward and, crucially, pull some incredibly practical wisdom from a place that's often overlooked, the world of recovery.
Exactly. The science gives us the fundamental mechanics, the how, but it's the lived experience of people who have grappled intensely with compulsive consumption that offers the why it matters and maybe a potential roadmap for finding balance in our own lives.
Okay, and at the core of all this, the source identifies dopamine as the brain's universal currency for measuring addictive potential.
That's the one.
So the more dopamine released in the brain's reward pathway, the more potentially addictive the experience is. Is that basically it?
That's the metric the brain uses, yeah.
I think
And one of the most sort of foundational insights is that the brain processes pleasure and pain in the same anatomical locations.
same place.
Right. Same place. Think of it like a balance scale, okay? Pleasure on one side, pain on the other. When you experience pleasure, that scale tips.
So if I eat a piece of really good chocolate, my balance tips towards pleasure.
Precisely. But the brain's whole job is to maintain a level balance, a state called homeostasis. It wants things even.
Right. Stability.
So automatically and unconsciously, self-regulating mechanisms kick in. The source uses this brilliant analogy of little gremlins hopping onto the pain side of the balance to counteract the weight you just put on the pleasure side.
Little gremlins. I love that. It makes it so clear. So the harder or longer you push that scale towards pleasure, the more gremlins pile onto the pain side to bring it back to neutral and maybe even tip it the other way.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
It's an unconscious, reflexive action. And this leads directly to the opponent process theory, this concept that after prolonged or repeated tipping towards pleasure, there's an opposite, often unpleasant after reaction.
Ah, okay. So what goes up must come down.
And often it comes down below where you started, below that original baseline. That's key.
Okay, so why does this pleasure-pain balance and these gremlins matter to you, listening right now?
Hmm?
Because let's be honest, most of us have behaviors we engage in more than we'd like, right? Things we consume or activities we just can't seem to pull away from sometimes.
Hmm.
This deep dive is really about understanding the fundamental mechanics behind that compulsion and, hopefully, finding strategies to manage overconsumption in a world that is constantly nudging us towards more, more, more.
And as the source emphasizes, the profound wisdom here doesn't just come from neuroscientists and labs. It comes from the lived experience of those most vulnerable to this dynamic people with addiction.
Right.
Their struggles, while sometimes they might seem extreme, can really be seen as amplified versions of tendencies we all possess. They offer critical insights into, well, the human condition in this age of overwhelming reward.
Okay, so let's dig into the problem side first.
Yeah.
We touched on the abundance of stimuli, but it's hard to overstate just how much highly rewarding stuff is instantly accessible today, isn't it?
It's a fundamental shift from any previous era in human history. It really is. And paradoxically, this relentless pursuit of pleasure, this constant engagement with high dopamine activities, it often leads to anhedonia.
Anhedonia. That's that terrible state where nothing feels enjoyable anymore.
That's it. You basically burn out your pleasure circuits.
The author shares her own experience with this, doesn't she? With romance novels.
Yes, she talks about compulsively reading them, like
Right.
late into the night, hour after hour. Eventually, she reached this point where she literally couldn't find a book she liked. Nothing worked.
Wow.
It felt like she had saturated or maybe even, burned out her reading pleasure circuits. She couldn't find enjoyment, but she still felt this strong pull, this difficulty stopping. It was a weird limbo.
That story just makes it so concrete. The very thing you seek for pleasure ends up robbing you of the ability to feel pleasure.
Exactly.
And the science in the source explains how addiction structurally impacts the brain to cause this, right?
Why?
It's not just psychological.
Oh, absolutely not. Prolonged, high-intensity exposure to these high dopamine rewards actually causes physical changes in the brain. There's a decrease in dopamine receptors and a decrease in dopamine release in the reward pathway itself.
So your brain literally becomes less sensitive?
Yes. The source has another great analogy here. Team dopamine takes their balls and their mitts and goes home.
Okay.
This decreased sensitivity means that natural rewards, the simple pleasures of life, a walk outside, a good conversation, they just don't register anymore. They feel flat.
So you're not getting the high from the addictive behavior anymore, and the simple joys of life feel bland. And without that high dopamine stimulus, you feel absolutely awful.
That's withdrawal in a nutshell. The source details the universal symptoms: anxiety, irritability, insomnia, just a general sense of unease, of dysphoria. Your brain is heavily tipped on the pain side of the balance now, desperately trying to compensate for the absence of the stimulus it's become dependent on.
Ugh. And this miserable state is what drives craving. But the source explains craving isn't just about feeling bad, is it? It's also linked to anticipation.
It is, very much so. There's an anticipatory dopamine spike before you even get the reward. It's often triggered by conditioned cues: seeing the bar, getting a notification on your phone, hearing the sound of a game loading up.
The triggers.
Right. But fascinatingly, right after that cue, before the reward is actually delivered, dopamine levels dip below your baseline.
Below baseline, wow.
Yeah. This sub-baseline state, this kind of felt sense of deficit, that's what drives the craving, the intense urge and the purposeful activity to go get the drug or engage in the behavior.
That explains that quote about how hard a lab animal will work for the drug. They're not just seeking pleasure, they're driven by that anticipatory dip and the resulting craving to just get back to level or above.
Exactly. They'll press levers hundreds, even thousands of times. And the source notes this entire anticipation craving cycle can operate largely outside of our conscious awareness. It's incredibly powerful, almost primal.
This isn't just individual psychology, though, is it? The sources connect this overabundance in our response to it to larger societal issues.
Absolutely. It's one of the central paradoxes of our time, isn't it? Despite unprecedented wealth, technological advancement, medical progress, we're seeing rising rates of pain and unhappiness.
Yeah, the World Happiness Report showing the U.S. less happy in 2018 than 2008, higher rates of reported pain here compared to many other developed nations.
It really makes you wonder, are we perhaps making ourselves more miserable by working so incredibly hard to avoid being miserable, trying to numb everything out?
And there's a really stark connection highlighted between this vulnerability to compulsive consumption and socioeconomic status that really stood out.
It's a critical point, yeah.
Yeah.
The poor and undereducated, particularly in wealthy nations, seem incredibly susceptible. They often have easy, cheap access to highly rewarding, high dopamine substances and behaviors. Think cheap fast food, readily available drugs, certain kinds of digital entertainment.
Right, the immediate gratification stuff.
Exactly. But they often lack access to the more meaningful life resources.
Yeah.
Good education, secure jobs, safe communities, quality healthcare. This toxic combination is directly linked to the rise in deaths of despair.
Those are drug overdose, alcohol-related liver disease, and suicide.
That's right. Particularly among middle-aged white Americans without a college degree, it's a tragic convergence.
And the internet obviously just pours fuel on this fire, not just through access, but through these social dynamics.
Oh, absolutely. The internet isn't just a delivery mechanism. It enables what the source calls social contagion. Ideas and behaviors spread virally, sometimes with terrifying speed.
Like that disturbing example mentioned by Detective Detto of a teenager who harmed his younger brother after watching online content.
Yeah, a literal contagion of harmful ideas facilitated by the web. It shows how powerful these influences can be, especially on young minds.
Another factor raised in the sources is the way modern society approaches parenting and education. A bit controversial, maybe?
Well, the source discusses this modern concept of children as psychologically fragile. The idea that they need to be insulated from discomfort and adversity, almost like being raised in a padded cell, as the author puts it.
Contrasted with historical views that saw discipline and, facing challenges as necessary for development.
Right. The worry expressed is that this approach might foster a profound fear of pain, lower tolerance for discomfort, maybe a sense of entitlement. ignorance of one's own flaws, and ultimately it could encourage more hedonistic behavior, just seeking pleasure, avoiding difficulty at all costs.
The example of Kevin, that young man whose philosophy was, I do whatever I want, whenever I want.
Followed immediately by his frank admission, not very well.
Yeah, that perfectly illustrates the potential pitfalls, doesn't it?
It really does.
And this avoidance of pain, it seems to extend deeply into how we approach even physical and emotional suffering, particularly within the medical system.
That's the medicalization of normal human suffering. There's this expectation, often unspoken, that doctors can and should eliminate all pain, partly based on this idea that untreated pain kindles future pain, which isn't always straightforward.
Right. And this drives the heavy reliance on prescribed medications, Adderall, Ambien, Ativan, Paxil, you name it, to mask symptoms.
Symptoms that, the sources argue, might actually be caused or certainly worsened by lifestyle factors. Things like lack of sleep, poor diet, chronic overstimulation from our devices, maybe just deficits in basic self-care.
Yeah, David's story is presented as a classic example, diagnosed with ADD and GAD.
Right, and he describes the use of multiple pills. He called them my A vitamins, Adderall, Ambien, Ativan, escalating over time. He frames his fatigue and inattentiveness as symptoms of his illness, rather than maybe acknowledging the role of, say, chronic sleep deprivation or constant digital engagement.
Using the diagnosis to justify taking more pills.
And he admits it quite openly. It was easier to take a pill than feel the pain.
Wow. And the source highlights this paradox. Despite massive increases in spending on psychiatric medications, the actual prevalence of mood and anxiety disorders hasn't really decreased.
It hasn't, which raises questions. And beyond the questionable long-term effectiveness for some people, these medications can have a significant cost in terms of emotional range,
How so?
Well, the source mentions a patient who found relief from depression with medication, which is great, but then discovered she couldn't cry at her own mother's funeral.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She eventually decided that limiting her emotional amplitude like that just wasn't worth it for her. She felt the lows were actually necessary to feel fully human, to experience the highs too.
So, okay, we're in this environment of overwhelming opportunity for pleasure, which science tells us fundamentally disrupts our ability to feel pleasure and actually increases our experience of pain. Then you add in societal factors and even medical approaches that kind of encourage numbing. It feels pretty daunting.
It can feel that way, definitely. But the sources really pivot here towards the wisdom gained from people in recovery. This is where the hope and the practical strategy start to emerge.
Okay, good. What's the first one?
The first key principle from this world is something called self-binding.
Self-binding. Making it harder to access the drug or behavior, right? Like Odysseus tying himself to the mast so he wouldn't jump overboard when he heard the sirens.
That's the classic analogy, exactly. It's
Yep.
about creating physical or psychological barriers between you and the compulsive behavior, putting obstacles in your own way, intentionally.
What are some modern examples?
Oh, lots. The source gives examples like using actual lock boxes for phones or substances, getting rid of a device entirely. The author herself got rid of her Kindle to curb that compulsive romance novel reading.
All right.
Medications like naltrexone or disulfiram for alcohol or gambling addiction are essentially chemical forms of self-binding.
Okay, naltrexone works by blocking the opioid system, right? But the source notes it can sometimes flatten all pleasure, not just the addictive high, which is a downside.
It can, yeah. And disulfiram is more of a direct deterrent. It makes you violently sick if you consume alcohol. A very strong negative reinforcement.
But Arnold's story shows the limits of relying only on these external methods, doesn't it? He found a way to outsmart the disulfiram.
He did. It highlights that these tools often need to be part of a larger strategy. The source also mentions weight loss surgeries, like gastric bypass, as a pretty extreme form of self-binding for food addiction. They can be effective, but there's a notable risk of just transferring the addiction, say, from food to alcohol if the underlying behavioral patterns aren't addressed. Emily's experience in the book touches on that.
Right, the addiction just finds a new outlet. There's also a broader kind of self-binding mentioned, categorical self-binding. What's that?
Yeah, this means avoiding triggers beyond just the primary drug or behavior itself. So Jacob, who was dealing with a very specific machine-related addiction, learned he had to avoid all provocative images and media, even if unrelated, because they'd set him off. Or Mitch, the gambler, who had to avoid any sports content, watching games, reading scores, listening to sports radio, because any exposure would trigger intense gambling cravings. It's about building protective walls around the core issue.
It makes total sense, but it also sounds incredibly hard to maintain. And willpower isn't infinite, as the source points out.
It definitely isn't.
Plus, you have market forces constantly working against you, right? Like how gluten-free suddenly appeared on all sorts of high-calorie junk food, kind of undermining the original health goal for many.
Exactly. The environment often actively works against your attempts at self-control. And as Arnold's story showed, pharmacological self-binding, the medication route, often isn't enough on its own without a deeper internal shift in behavioral change.
Okay, so building on self-binding, the source introduces a more comprehensive framework. It's called Dopamine, an acronym.
Yes, exactly. Dopamine. It's like a structured approach, a roadmap for taking a break from compulsive behaviors and reassessing.
Okay, let's break it down. D is for.
D is for data, tracking your consumption. Just like with fitness trackers or calorie counters, the first step is often just measuring, getting an honest look at what you're actually doing.
Makes sense. O.
O is for objectives. Clearly identifying the problems related to your use, articulating your reasons for wanting to change, and maybe even envisioning who your future self could be if you make these changes. The book mentions Delilah considering her future self free from the issues her cannabis use was causing.
Key.
P is for problems. And the source is very clear here. High dopamine drugs and behaviors will eventually lead to problems. It's almost inevitable, whether they are health problems, relationship issues, financial, moral. Something gives eventually.
And these substances often cloud your ability to even see the link, right? Like
Yeah.
Delilah initially just blaming her parents' reaction, not her own use.
Exactly. The substance itself makes it hard to accurately assess cause and effect.
Okay.
A is for abstinence. This is presented as a crucial step, maybe the most crucial. Taking a complete break is necessary to restore that pleasure-pain balance,
Yeah.
to let those gremlins dissipate, basically. It allows your brain to reset, so you can start enjoying simpler, natural rewards again.
And it's necessary to really see the link between the substance use and how you actually feel without the fog.
Precisely. And this means, importantly, going through withdrawal. Feeling worse before you feel better. It's part of the process.
How long is recommended?
The source suggests a minimum of around 2 weeks of abstinence is often needed to reach a kind of turning point for the brain to begin to reset significantly. And, crucially, it emphasizes the importance of treating any co-occurring psychiatric conditions during this period. You need support.
Got it. M.
M is for mindfulness. This is about learning to be present with discomfort, with craving, with difficult feelings, without immediately running away or trying to fix it with consumption.
Just sitting with it.
Yeah, like the author's patient who started walking outside without music, just noticing the trees. Or David learning to let difficult feelings crest over him like a wave instead of immediately reaching for a pill. The source makes a great point. Constantly trying to avoid yourself is actually exhausting.
I can see that. Okay, Ira.
I is for insight. This is where the pieces start to come together, hopefully. After some abstinence and mindfulness, you begin to see the genuine cause and effect relationship between your compulsive behavior, your feelings, and your life circumstances. The fog really starts to lift. N is for next steps. Planning for the future. What does balanced engagement look like for you moving forward? The source notes that for most people, this involves finding ways to use less. Not necessarily quitting entirely, though some do choose that.
Like Delilah, who still liked cannabis but wanted to change how she used it.
Exactly. It's about finding a sustainable path.
And finally, E.
E is for experiment. This is interesting. Relapse is reframed here not as a failure, but as data, as information. Jacob's story is a powerful example. He relapsed after seeing a trigger on TV in a hotel room. He went out, bought the machine parts related to his addiction, threw them away, then retrieved them from the trash, used them, went to a meeting, felt shame, used again later that day. It was messy.
Yeah.
But each step, including the relapses, provided crucial information for him to understand his triggers, his patterns, his vulnerabilities, and ultimately build a more resilient plan for the future.
That reframes things significantly, doesn't it? Instead of feeling like a total defeat, a relapse is a learning opportunity. That's huge.
It really is. It takes away some of the shame and paralysis that can come with setbacks.
Okay, so besides abstinence and self-binding, the source introduces another concept that seems really counterintuitive: embracing pain.
Yeah, this one definitely goes against our deepest instincts, doesn't it? We're wired to seek pleasure and avoid discomfort. But if you think back to that pleasure-pain balance model, it actually makes a certain kind of sense. By willingly Intentionally choosing to experience something difficult or painful, you are actively putting weight on the pain side of the balance.
Okay. And what does that do? Does it trigger the gremlins on the pleasure side to compensate?
Exactly. It triggers the body's natural reflexive counterresponse
Mm-hmm.
to bring the scale back to neutral. But this time, it's tipping it towards pleasure from the pain side. And the theory is that doing this repeatedly can actually shift your overall hedonic set point over time,
Meaning?
meaning you become more resilient to pain and discomfort and potentially more able to experience pleasure from less intense, more natural stimuli.
Mm.
You kind of recalibrate your baseline.
This sounds a lot like the science of hormesis, the idea that small to moderate doses of stressors, noxious stimuli, can actually have beneficial effects.
That's the underlying principle, yes. Things like cold exposure, heat exposure, intense exercise, these are all forms of hormesis. They're stressors that provoke an adaptive beneficial response.
Michael's story with cold water therapy is a great illustration in the book.
It really is. He started with just cold showers, then moved to ice baths, then even added a motor to keep the water temperature consistently painfully low. And the science backs this up. Studies show significant, enduring increases in dopamine and norepinephrine levels after the cold exposure ends. The payoff comes later.
And he described feeling great for hours afterward, right? That post-cold plunge euphoria.
Yes, but it's important to note, the source also points out that Michael arguably became addicted to the pain pursuit itself.
Ah. So even seemingly healthy behaviors can become compulsive.
Absolutely. Exercise is another prime example the source discusses. It has incredibly powerful, sustained positive effects on mood, anxiety, energy. The source calls its effects more profound than any pill.
And our modern sedentary lifestyle, spending half our waking hours sitting, that's linked to so many problems because we basically evolved to pursue effort, to work for rewards.
Exactly. But even things like running wheels for lab animals show that the pursuit of effort itself can become addictive. Overtraining syndrome in athletes is a real thing. Pushing the pain-effort boundary too far becomes detrimental. It's always about balance.
Using pain to treat pain seems like the ultimate counterintuitive strategy, like David doing exposure therapy for his social anxiety.
Yeah, intentionally seeking out the very situations that terrified him. Making small talk with coworkers, which was excruciating for him. Even purposefully spilling coffee on himself at Starbucks just to practice sitting with the intense discomfort and social awkwardness, proving to himself he could actually tolerate it.
Wow. That takes guts.
It does. But by leaning into that pain, he built resilience, and the anxiety gradually diminished over time.
And the source mentions other examples too, like extreme sports, skydiving, etc., where the intense pain or fear mixed with adrenaline becomes a potent drug in itself.
Right, and that too can lead back to anhedonia with repeated excessive exposure, or even work addiction, where the flow state can function like a drug, providing escape but potentially damaging other areas of life.
It's definitely a tricky balance, and embracing pain is just harder, isn't it? It goes against that innate wiring.
It does. You have to consciously remember the delayed reward, the pleasure or relief that comes after the discomfort, rather than just going for the immediate hit.
Okay, moving on from embracing pain, another powerful tool highlighted from the recovery world is radical honesty.
Yes, this is about telling the truth consistently,
Mm.
not just to other people, but maybe most importantly, to yourself, even when that truth exposes your flaws or might have uncomfortable consequences.
That sounds incredibly vulnerable. Why is it considered so effective?
Well, the source identifies several key benefits. First, it promotes self-awareness. The author herself only really grasped the negative impact of her romance novel habit when she started being truly honest with herself and then others about it. You can't change what you don't acknowledge.
Makes sense.
Second, and this is huge, it fosters intimate human connections. Jacob telling his wife about his relapse, expecting the worst, and instead getting understanding that actually strengthened their bond. The source calls it an intimacy explosion linked to oxytocin and dopamine release. Maria telling her husband and brother had a similar effect, building deep trust. Vulnerability, paradoxically, draws people closer.
So it creates a more truthful foundation for your relationships, but also for your own internal story, your narrative.
Exactly. It allows you to build an accurate autobiography, which promotes accountability. You start owning your choices rather than operating from a victim narrative, blaming everything else.
And the source even suggests it might help prevent addiction in some cases, citing Drake's story.
Yeah, the story about his DUI incident, where his decision to be radically honest, despite apparently having avenues to minimize or lie, seemed to lead to a more positive and transformative outcome than might have been expected given his privilege. Honesty shifted the dynamic.
It's contrasted really starkly with how compulsive consumption isolates people, making them indifferent to others, like that heroin-addicted rat ignoring the distressed rat trapped in the cage in the experiment.
Right. Addiction thrives in secrecy and isolation. Honesty breaks that cycle and builds connection. The source does acknowledge complexities, context matters, privilege matters, as perhaps in Drake's story, and honesty isn't always simple, but the core principle that vulnerability fosters connection seems really powerful.
Okay, and the final key piece of wisdom from recovery discussed is pro-social shame. This sounds like another contradiction. Shame is bad, right?
Well, that's the distinction the source makes. It separates destructive shame from shame that can actually be helpful or pro-social.
Yeah.
We often hear about the shame-guilt dichotomy, feeling bad about who you are, shame, versus feeling bad about an action.
Oh, yeah.
But the author suggests the really critical difference lies in how others respond when you reveal your transgression, your mistake, your bad action.
Okay, so destructive shame is when others condemn you, reject you, shun you for what you've done.
Precisely. That rejection tends to perpetuate the behavior because you hide it to avoid more shame, feeding the cycle of shame and isolation. Lori's early experience trying to get help from her church community is a painful example in the book. She felt judged and outcast, which just pushed her deeper into her addiction at that time.
And pro-social shame, then, is when others respond differently, with acceptance and guidance.
Yes. They hold you closer, in a way.
Yeah.
They offer support, understanding, guidance. This mitigates the shame itself and actually helps you stop the behavior. Maria finding acceptance and belonging in AA, or Lori eventually finding real recovery there later on, illustrate this kind of de-shaming process.
So revealing your deepest secrets or failures in a group like that and finding acceptance instead of rejection is incredibly healing.
It is. And this connects to an interesting concept from behavioral economics called club goods.
Club goods.
Yeah, the rewards you get from belonging to a specific group, a sense of identity, support, shared norms. These rewards are strengthened by active participation and adherence to the group's rules or values.
So in a group like AA, revealing a relapse, while difficult, actually becomes a kind of club good.
In a sense, yes, because it creates opportunities for empathy, for mutual support, for others to share their own experiences, maybe even for a bit of healthy schadenfreude, there but for the grace of God go I. It reinforces the shared struggle and the value of the group's honesty.
And free riders, people who don't participate, honestly threaten these club goods. That might explain why some 12-step groups can seem strict.
Exactly. It can be a way to protect the integrity and effectiveness of the group dynamic. The author's own family chocolate story is a small-scale example of this principle.
Ah, right, where she admitted taking her kids' chocolate and lying about it.
Yes, owning the mistake, their forgiveness, and even their light teasing afterwards served as a kind of gentle penance, reaffirming the family values. Mistakes happen, you own them, and you're not cast out. It was pro-social.
It sounds like that kind of mutual honesty creates a space where destructive shame just can't take root, leading to that intimacy explosion, again, that adaptive dopamine rush you get from feeling truly seen and accepted, flaws and all.
And this is such a critical antidote, the source argues, in our current social media-saturated world, which often seems designed to fuel destructive self-shame through constant comparison and curated images of perfection. Pro-social shame within a real community is the opposite.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a tremendous amount here. It's really a journey from the problem to potential solution.
It really is.
Just to recap, the challenge of living in this reward-saturated world, the fundamental neuroscience of how pleasure and pain are balanced in the brain, that seesaw and the gremlins, and how easily that balance gets disrupted.
Leading to tolerance, withdrawal, craving.
Oh, right. And then the profound wisdom derived from the recovery community, the practical strategies like self-binding, both physical and categorical.
And the structured approach of the dopamine framework for taking a break and reassessing.
Then the really counterintuitive power of embracing pain, using hormesis to reset our balance.
The liberating practice of radical honesty for self-awareness and connection.
And finally, the healing connection found through pro-social shame and accepting communities, turning vulnerability into strength.
It's definitely anything but a simple picture.
Yeah.
Finding and maintaining balance in this age of abundance, it really goes against a lot of our fundamental wiring. and, frankly, the environment we've created for ourselves.
Absolutely. It's not easy. And the sources really leave us with some deeply relevant questions to sit with, don't they?
They really do.
Like, why is it that in a time of unprecedented wealth, technology, and comfort, we seem to report more pain and more unhappiness? Is it possible that it's precisely because we're working so incredibly hard to numb, avoid, and eliminate any and all discomfort?
And, does the problem lie solely with perhaps permanently broken brains for some individuals? Or is it also significantly a consequence of a world that has in many ways set people up to struggle by making those high dopamine rewards cheap and ubiquitous, while meaningful connection and authentic struggle are harder to come by?
Yeah. And is our pervasive approach of medicating away nearly every form of human suffering from sadness to discomfort to inattention, is that worth the potential cost of limiting our full emotional spectrum? Is there an inherent value maybe in embracing pain, not as a punishment, but as just a necessary part of the human experience, something that could potentially lead to more enduring pleasure and deeper connection in the long run?
And finally, can leaning into things like radical honesty and finding or building those rare, accepting communities, can that truly help us cultivate a sense of internal resilience and genuine connection? Can we build a kind of plenty mindset based on our inner resources rather than just external consumption, even when we're under the relentless pressure of this reward-saturated world?
Really powerful questions to consider as you navigate your own balance in this age of indulgence.